The topic for discussion today is the state of Zimbabwe politics.
View this, see politics as the interactive, the number one science for this, by making clear what is meant by politics, because the question that Solane has posed is, what is the state of Zimbabwe politics today? While it is easy for us to assume that we know what we are talking about, we have the same view of what politics is. The reality is that, in fact, we don't have the same views about what politics is. And for that reason, I would like to take some of the time I have been given to make clear what I mean by politics, or what I understand by politics, so that when we conclude, or I conclude this discussion, there will not be confusion as to what is the background or the logical reasoning behind my conclusion or my answer to the question. Now, for some people, and there are many, politics to them is the struggle for political power, in which politicians slug it out for elective public positions and offices in government. Those who view politics excuse me, Solani, I almost choked. I was taking
sorry.
some.
Please drink some water. No, don't choke, please.
I have water with me here.
Okay.
So I reached for
Apologies.
water. So I started looking around me to see who might be coming from the other side, who is trying to ambush me, and I didn't find anyone. So it's me alone and a bottle of water, which almost choked me.
Hey, I'm grateful that none of them are here yet. But you remember, it's still too early. It's still too early.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So those who view politics in these terms, in the sense that it is about a struggle for political power, and politicians fight it out to gain positions in the public domain or in government. To them, politics is like some kind of a dirty game, because the protagonists in the struggle for political power use any means necessary or available to them, including foul play and corruption, to gain political power. That's one view. And it is related to what I'm going to say is my substantive answer to the question we are discussing. For others, politics is an allocative question of who gets what, when, and how. And because this is about a struggle for resource allocation, access to resources, there can be a science to it. Some kind of, based on some kind of a calculus or a template that is used to define or to construct an allocative mechanism for distributing limited and even scarce resources among competing groups in society. So this is a classical, traditional view of politics. Of course, there are more classical views or approaches, some which go back centuries ago. For example, in the 18th century, Enlightenment theorists in Europe saw politics as the application of human reason, rationality. The culmination of that application is politics. Other much more radical theorists treated politics as the evolution of productive forces moving from primitive society to modern industrialized society. There are also very prominent theologians who have viewed politics as a liberating process of revelation through which God reveals his will to us, the human beings, humankind, if you want. And he reveals his will that should be done on earth as it is in heaven. So what we do is God's will, and that being politics. But earlier in the classical period, in ancient Greeks, politics was unpacked as the first or primary science, the number one science. This is what Plato, Aristotle did. The number one science whose quest is the search for a good and a virtuous society based on pure human knowledge. So if you ask, oh, what are you doing? What is politics? The answer will be, well, politics is that unending, never-ending search for a good and just or virtuous society. So with the foregoing very cursory summary in mind, I myself see politics as the interactive pursuits of common interests or common goals by different individuals, different households, different families, different groups, and different organizations in society. It is in the nature of human beings to be political or to do politics. Doing politics as human beings is what distinguishes us from other species, the vegetative animals and so forth. God has given us the capacity to talk, and God has created us in such a way that we can't live and exist in the mountains, in the wild, in the bush alone. A human being can't exist alone. And that is why we have the capacity of speech. The capacity of speech empowers us with the facility to do politics. The facility to do politics is a facility to engage each other, to interact with one another. In other words, to be interactive or to be group-centered. And the most significant groups being our families and perhaps our communities, and these days, our nations, our countries. That's politics for me, and that's the idea of politics I'm using in this discussion to answer your questions, Solani. Now, when I apply this view, the last one of politics, as an interactive enterprise, the quintessential, the real nitty-gritty main point that defines us and distinguishes us as human beings. That part, we apply it to Zimbabwe's politics today. And when I do that, I come up with a twofold understanding of the state of politics in our country today. And I'm going to be very schematic about this in the hope that if the scheme lends itself to discussion or questions, then we deal with them in the open session. So the first is that naturally we have to, you don't create what you want or go to a shop or to buy what you want and say, now I want that one and I choose this and that and this is politics. You deal with what is before you, in front of you. You deal with what's there, whether you like it or not. In that regard, the first sphere of politics today in Zimbabwe is defined by the ZANU-PF public sphere. Over the last 4.5 years, the ZANU-PF public sphere has been depoliticized. There's little spirited and robust public engagement by ZANU-PF or in ZANU-PF of the kind that we used to see, the kind that used to be very pronounced, very visible in yesteryears. ZANU-PF now, or rather over the last 4.5 years, the ZANU-PF practitioners in particular, not just ZANU-PF itself as a body politic or a body corporate, the practitioners in ZANU-PF, the ZANU-PF leaders and the ZANU-PF members, they are conspicuous by their absence from the public sphere. Or, put differently, they have been over the last 4.5 years. Because if we don't want to confuse what we are beginning to see, people beginning to raise their head and voices and so forth, because the elections are due, the general elections, that is, are due within the next 10 months. That's different. We are characterizing where we are today as has evolved over the last 4.5 years. The practitioners in ZANU-PF have been conspicuous by their silence because their public sphere has been depoliticized. It's been very difficult over this period in question to tell what ZANU-PF gurus, chefs, gladiators, and so forth are thinking. Everyone has been keeping everything in their chest. This is, in my view, a consequence of one of the 6 triggers I outlined at the beginning, namely the November 2017 military coup. Invariably, depoliticization of the public sphere to become non-interactive, to become inactive, like to become deactivated, as you were, is a result of a military coup. And this tends to happen wherever a military coup takes place. And this tends to affect the ranks of the party that was in power before the coup. Its ranks become immobilized. They become afraid. They become silent. They are shocked because they suddenly discover that the mantra of politics dictating the gun was propaganda. That is the truth and reality, which comes from the 18th century Westphalian idea of the state, that those who control violence or the means or instruments of violence are the ones who determine the politics of the day. So, although there had been a number of reasons why Zimbabweans would have been aware that politics is dictated by those who monopolize or control the instruments of violence, the ZANU-PF self-understanding or political mantra was, we are in charge. The gun is subservient to our dictates. We call the shots. Then, boom, November 2017 happens, and the gun says, this is it. And everybody gets shocked and withdraws and now knows better that you can make a lot of noise, but the possibility of the gun putting an end to your noise is not theoretical, it's real. And this has had a devastating impact in terms of politics within ZANU-PF. And you know, as a result of that, if you wanted to kind of zero in on some tangibles about this, or tangibles that express this, is that over the last 4.5 years, it's been more likely to see robust activism, not from politics, not from ZANU-PF branches and so forth, or gladiators, but maybe from characters like Passion. Some people say Java, some say Java, and so forth. But you get a guy like that making an impact, but because the sphere has been depoliticized, he makes impact through music with Rocky and company, through the pulpit, use the name of God in vain, or through some money-making scheme, but not through the usual politics that people had gotten accustomed to seeing. Definitely, I'm sure you will agree that you haven't seen over the last 4.5 years the likes of Jabulani Sibanda's political activism, or the likes of Philip Chiang. And this is not to mention the likes of any chairperson of ZANU-PF, who over the last 4.5 years have kept a very loud silence. In the past, the chairpersons, if you are said to be ZANU-PF chairperson, you'll be making all sorts of noise about empowerment, about land reform, about this. These days, they are afraid, they are quiet. I mean, Jabulani Sibanda has been chairperson for a good close to 2 years now. Many people have forgotten that he's chairman of what is supposed to be a vibrant province like Bulawayo. It's not the million-man Jabulani Sibanda. And you see, in politics, you have to look for certain symbolisms that express or make the point. You've got to be an outsider like Java, who stays away from politics, and for him, it's enough to be seen with the president here and there, and the next is running around with youths in the streets and so forth. And those chairpersons, and even the what is it called, the in ZANU-PF, they call the commissars, and so forth. But if you were to just grab someone in the streets who claims to be political minded and ask them, who is ZANU-PF's commissar, they won't tell you. Someone might even say border gaze and so forth, because those are the last sort of real commissars they used to say. That is an expression of a depoliticized sphere, which is or has afflicted the generality of ZANU-PF members. But be that as it may, ZANU-PF members continue to assert the party policy positions, especially on signature issues like opposition to Western sanctions and so forth. However, what is notable in this context about ZANU-PF in terms of the state of politics in Zimbabwe today is that ZANU-PF is the only party that is still recruiting members. They are recruiting from the opposition. We've seen it. And I'm not talking about people like Monzora, who today became part of Poland and so forth. I'm talking about even those who had moved with Monzora, people like Chebundu and so forth, Shumba, Mnangagwa joining ZANU-PF. I mean, the people, we don't get the sort of nut and bolt analysis of politics that you get in other countries. If we did, we would have some interesting critical examination of the dynamics of getting people like Chebundu joining ZANU-PF. But ZANU-PF is recruiting from the opposition, never mind the manner or methods of recruitment. It is recruiting in the diaspora. It is rehabilitating G40 so-called elements like Kudzai Banga and others. And ZANU-PF has even gone back in history to make what it calls corrections, to give national hero status to the likes of Ndabaneng Stole, James Kerema, who previously were persona non grata within the ZANU-PF sphere. But notably, the one thing that ZANU-PF is doing all these things, which are very instructive, is nevertheless failing to come to terms with Guguraundi, to resolve it honestly with truth, justice, and finality. They've tried to recruit CSOs in Bulawayo. They have even tried to recruit chiefs and some of the CSOs in Matabeleland provinces, as well as in Bulawayo, the chiefs in the rural provinces there. We have been tempted because, you know, they bring bags and bags of money, so the people get tempted. They found it very hard. They've realized that they would lose credibility, and some of them have indeed lost credibility. So it is instructive that an issue, emotive and very serious issue like Guguraundi has been elusive, but nevertheless, they've tried to do the other stuff that I've referred to increase their ranks. So within ZANU-PF or the ZANU-PF variable, if you ask what is the politics today, well, from what I've said, the conclusion is that it is depoliticized. And because it is depoliticized, it is non-active. It is non-interactive. There's no interaction. And that is quite problematic, because by definition, politics is supposed to be I have to
interactive.
Yeah. So
Right. Whilst we're waiting for Professor to come back, I would like to welcome everyone that's joined the space. Now, I do see messages saying that there is internet connectivity here or network issues. What I'd like to tell you is that at times that does happen, dependent on where you are. It could be the network where you are, but here we are actually hearing each other.
Mami and Tele, I'm giving a lecture.
Sorry, I noticed the professor's just gotten a call there and just muted his mic just in case some of you wanted to hear what is he talking about, who is he talking to. So, Professor, I've just muted your mic. I didn't want people to
You
hear
did well.
your presence.
You did very well. I got a call that was ringing, and I thought you were hearing it.
No.
And I
It's
thought
okay.
I should answer. But thank you for your protection.
Not at all, no problem at all. I was quite interested to hear what you're saying, because you're saying in your definition, that the one I liked about the interactiveness. So I think you were saying that the politics in Zimbabwe is non-interactive. That's where you stopped. So you can carry on.
Yes, and I was saying that in relation to the one consequence or one figure of the current state of politics in Zimbabwe, which are the events of the uh, was it 15th of November 2017, which affected ZANU PF. And so from that point of view, you know, when you discover in real terms that the gun dictates politics, it is a life-changing discovery. Because it disabuses you of everything you have believed that the politics dictate the guns, but then you are shown no, it's actually the other way around. That has a devastating impact on the essential, on the real, in my view, that is, the real meaning and understanding of what politics is. Interaction. Politics is interactive. That is what it is. And when it ceases, when you are depoliticized and you become non-interactive, you don't know what to say. Of course, you will always think something because human beings don't stop thinking. But when things that you think about, things that you see are nevertheless undiscussable, you can't talk about them, you whisper and so forth. When that happens, then the state of politics is negative. And I suggest that by and large, that has happened within the ZANU-PF sphere. Now, on the other hand, the opposition sphere over the period in question has been dominated by deeply entrenched politics of good guys versus bad guys. The template of politics that is used by the opposition is not about ideas. It is not about ideology. It is not about policies. It is all about people. People who are supposed to be good versus people who are supposed to be bad. The insertion of supposed is mine, but if you were to view this template genuinely with honesty, they are not supposed, they are actually like people who are bad versus people who are good. This dominates the discourse of opposition circles. Those who are good can neither do nor say anything wrong. They are always right by virtue of who they are. On the other hand, those who are bad guys never ever do or say anything right. They are always wrong by virtue of who they are. This is Zimbabwe politics today as defined from the opposition sphere. If you participate in most opposition spheres, or if you study them, you analyze them, you unpack them, they are always about ningi aite, ningi azodai, akashata like this, and so forth. And there is an aspect of mutual admiration and support to say, yeah, all right, we are not paying, we are not paying. In fact, there are a lot of people who, from the point of view of the opposition sphere, were born bad, have lived bad, and will die bad. They are irredeemable. They are beyond redemption. But the good ones, they could have been bad yesterday, but if they come and join and say and sing the chorus, they also become good guys and so forth. But there is this issue where the traditional questions about what is false versus what is true doesn't matter. What is correct versus what is wrong doesn't matter. What matters is who is saying what. If it's one of us, they are correct every day. If it's the other ones, they are wrong They are just wrong by definition. Now, that affects politics as an interactive enterprise. There is something very defeating, something which does not bring the best in any individual, doesn't bring the best in any community, if the reasoning template is good guys versus bad guys. How do you begin to engage ideas? Now, I do want to suggest this, that just like the depoliticization of the ZANU-PF sphere is a consequence or an expression of the events of November 2017, part of the bitterness that leads to the bad, or rather good guys versus bad guys template in the opposition circles is to do with those events. Part of it, remember I outlined 6. Part of it is that because the opposition writ large was part of the 2017 military coup, but they clearly were shortchanged even as the coup was happening. We all saw what happened on the 18th of November when some ZANU-PF elements started saying, when they could now see that this is really succeeding and so forth, they started saying, "This is, you're not part of it." One a major example of this is when Patrick Chamisa snatched a microphone from some opposition guy who wanted to address people there and say, no, this is ours. That kind of obviously invited bitterness to say, but you guys, we thought we were all in the bandwagon of Mugabe must go with the criminals so-called surrounding him, and we made it happen. Now you want to make it your own thing. Kind of understandably engenders bitterness. And certainly, events of the disputed election made it worse. Although, in my analysis of my view, I don't know what really the opposition people thought would happen 7 months, if you have an election 7 months after a military coup. And some of the leaders of the intervention that happened in November 2017 started saying right up front, we can't take such risks, only to give up the power 7 months later and we say, we're having an election. The election was designed to legitimate the events of 2017, rather November 2017. But being excluded after the event and then having that kind of an election with a major dispute, and then having the events of the 1st of August 2018, then having events of January 2019, then having that Supreme Court decision of March 2020, then having the incredible, unprecedented recalls in 2020, most of it from March throughout into 2021, recalls of MPs and recalls of councillors or councils, members of councils, and the impact of that on the people, the electorate that is, can cause bitterness and so forth, and can cause a different sort of politics, because that was shock and awe. And shock and awe strategies have an element of saying, my God, I thought this was impossible. I would have taken a bet, my last dollar, that this will not happen. Then it happens. ZANU-PF people would have taken a bet, and some of us assisted in encouraging that bet. We were saying, no, in 2017, in SADC, in the AU, modern world, a coup is impossible. Has it gone? And you're saying that to people, and then it happens. They say, "Oh my God, what should I believe?" And the idea that there could be mass recalls of MPs and councillors, no, has it gone? That no one will be daring. Then it happens. While you're scratching your head over that, they take your headquarters. Say, "Oh my God!" While you're scratching your head, they take your funds, parliamentary funds, and so forth. And you're like, "Oh, what's next?" While you're still scratching your head, they take the name of your party. That changes your political outcome. I find I get frustrated as a politician, not really, but as a student of politics. I just don't understand why we are not getting informed studies which look at this. You have people trying to look at our country from a normal template with normal lenses. They are not kind of shocked by these things. It's very difficult for people to recover from that. What I see most of the time is an analysis attempts to analyze which look at people like me. Oh, and what is interesting when opposition people look at someone like me or my colleagues, so-called G4, they do so like they are engaged in a spectator sport. Ha ha ha! Loss of power syndrome. Ah! And then they say to Nick Mangwana, hey, Nick Mangwana, behave yourself. If you don't behave yourself, look at Jonathan Moyo. You will be like Jonathan Moyo. I'm like, do they know really where I am and so forth? That's one thing. But
Professor,
the
Professor,
real issue, yeah.
Professor, I wanted to just remind you. Remember what you said when you started that when you give time to a
Yes,
former
yes, yes. I'm
politician.
concluding. I'm aware of that, Solana.
Okay,
I beg your indulgence, but I want to make this point because this
no,
point is to simply say we are not. The issue is not what is happening to these individuals because there are structural issues here. It's about the question you asked, the state of politics today. And you can't understand the state of politics today without unraveling the background of where we have come from. And in this case, in the last 4.5 years. So that's about two spheres. These two spheres are part of the public domain in Zimbabwe. And I think it's fair to conclude by then asking, so what is it that is missing which creates this sort of thing or deepens this the two consequences that I've shared with you? In my view, the real missing thing and the more important defining characteristic of the state of politics in our country today is that while broadly speaking Zimbabwe has law and order, and the law and order has an impact, yes, we know people argue about it, has an impact on our politics. It nevertheless does not have social cohesion. Zimbabwe's public politics lacks social cohesion, and social cohesion is the missing link in Zimbabwe's politics. In my view, this is the case because some 42 years since our independence, Zimbabweans have not developed or found shared values. There is no political party or organization in Zimbabwe today which styles itself in terms of values. They are in Europe and America, some other places, the countries' politicians say, we are defending our values. We are fighting for our values. And yet, in our case, some political parties even boast that they don't have values. They say this is not important, so no worries. Yet, values or common values are what defines nationhood, what defines a common identity. People can share the same values but have different ideas, share the same values but have different ideologies, share the same values but have different policies about the same thing, share the same values but belong to different religions, share the same values but have different traditions or culture, share the same values but have different ethnic groups. And indeed, people can share the same values but belong to different political parties or have different political parties. Until in such, until in such time that this happens, we will have this kind of state politics that exists in Zimbabwe today, but we will have the worst of it. To me, it remains a mystery as to why Zimbabwe has founding principles and values in its constitution when nobody gives a damn about them. They are enshrined in Section 3. So, to conclude, the state of Zimbabwe politics today is that the public domain has two contrasting fears, one depoliticized and largely defining the sphere of the ruling party, ZANU-PF, and the other bitter and defining the sphere of the opposition writ large. By opposition, I don't mean this party, that party, I mean the entire opposition. And this leaves the public domain without the much needed social cohesion. I thank you, Solana. Thank you for indulging me.
You are most welcome, Professor. You are most welcome.